Well, friends, we have been on a really long journey together over the past few months here, past couple of months, and we've been walking through a series that has taken us through the book of Genesis. And Genesis is really a fascinating book, and I think it's fascinating because of the way that maybe we have thought about Genesis, but also the way that academics are helping us to understand it. The book of Genesis, for many of us, as a book of origins or beginnings, has been used maybe in a fundamentalist way or maybe in a way that has caused tension between things like science or maybe about history, or maybe it's that we look at the book and we've had people who tell us, this is the way things are, this is the way things started, and anything outside of that, you're not understanding the real essence of the faith or something like that. What we've discovered is that there's something more beautiful about this book. That this book actually has an incredible story to tell us beyond the stories that we even find there. One way I like to think about this is that the stories that we are looking at in Genesis have multiple layers, not just about what the stories themselves tell, but why those stories were told. And that's sort of the key, and that's sort of the thing that I've been really trying to focus on in this series for us to understand. And it actually will help us as we move forward, into the future, if we have this understanding that one of the key questions that we always should be asking ourselves every time we come to the Scripture is, why was this story told? It really helps us because it helps us to avoid taking the Bible out of its context, using it in ways that it was never meant to be used. When we come to the Scriptures and say, why was this told? It has us asking better questions. That kind of question finds us saying, so who are the people then that heard this story? Why were they being told this story at all? How does that help them understand who they are? And then what's really cool is once we get to that place, we get the incredible permission to say, then what could it possibly mean to me? To first understand, what does it mean to the people it was written to? Then we can understand, well, then what could it possibly mean for me today once I understand that? So once we get those kind of pieces in place, the Bible really takes on an incredible picture for us of what it can be. I think it changes it. I think it gives us the excitement to study it in new ways. I think it allows us to have conversations that are a lot more interesting. And I found that specifically in Genesis. Genesis is one of those books that, again, it is just filled with layer after layer after layer of fascinating and interesting stories that come back and help us understand the people who, again, wrote the stories, who told the stories, who were sharing the stories with each other, and who were trying to make a sense of their lives through these stories. And for some of us, I think it helps if we sort of connect this to our own lives. That we all tell stories, and a story on its own about our lives wouldn't make sense if we didn't know the people in the story, right? I mean, if you just told a story and there were just a set of names, but you didn't know anything about the people in the story, it really wouldn't be as funny. And maybe you wouldn't even get to capture what the story's about. Is this a drama? Is this a comedy? Is this historical fiction? What is this story? So, Kurt, I'm sure you have all kinds of stories in your life. I know that you used to have a van, and you used to drive around in this van around the city. And you used to just travel, and you used to travel all around the United States in this van, right? You went all over the place, right? And this van was kind of decorated, kind of weird, right? And it probably did have some carpet inside or something like that. Yeah, and so when I tell you guys, did they have shag carpet, or what was the carpet? Was there shag carpet? There was shag carpet. You guys are getting a whole new image of Kurt, and I want you to, because if I told this story to you and I started and I said there was this guy driving around a van, he went all over the United States and it had shag carpet in it, you might make up all kind of things about this person. You might think, was he an Amazon driver? Was he protecting the floor with his shag carpet for all the boxes that go in it? Or was he a delivery boy? Was he, who is this person? But when you find out that it was Kurt, and you look at Kurt and you realize that Kurt spent much of his life chasing around the Grateful Dead, the story begins to make a lot more sense to you now than it did before. And Michelle, didn't you have a van as well? Did you have a van? You didn't have a van, okay, but you were great. Did you like the Grateful Dead too? You like the Grateful Dead too. See, so now you understand Kurt in a new way, and it all begins to make a whole lot of sense. Kurt, I don't know how much you remember of that time of your life, but I'm thankful that you remember enough of it to tell me the story. So guys, doesn't that help us understand? Why do people tell the stories they tell? Why are these important, and how does it help us to understand that person? That is why Genesis matters, and that is why learning about Genesis the right way matters. Because otherwise we could make up all kinds of things about these stories that aren't true. We could use these stories in ways they were never meant to be used, and we could use these stories and take them completely out of context and miss the point about the people who are telling the story. So, as we've learned over the last few weeks, and I have gone back to this over and over again because it's so important, who are these people who wrote these stories? Well, about 2,500 years ago, a group of people who lived in the city of Jerusalem were violently removed from their city. They were attacked by a people called the Babylonians. As many of you know from history, there were kingdoms that would rise up from different locations throughout the ancient world. Those people saw the world and said, well, we should have as much border as we want. We should be people who dominate, the known world around us. There are still people like that in our world today. But they looked at that world. That was sort of the way they lived. And so you had people like the Assyrians, you had the Egyptians, you had the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire. Specifically here, we're talking about the Babylonian Empire. Now, Babylon was a city that was in modern-day Iraq. It sits just south of Baghdad, and that empire became huge, and it began to take over all of these different cities and kingdoms around the area that we call the Middle East today. One of the interesting things about them is that Babylonians were a little bit different. All of these people who did this conquering, they all had a little bit different perspective on how to do it. They all had a different way of when you conquer people, what do you do with them so that your empire can grow? Some of them were awful and committed incredible atrocities to wipe people out of existence. That was their goal, that was their hope, and it was just awful. Again, we see that in our world today, but that was a reality back then. You would wipe out your enemies, you would take their land, and you would do whatever you want with it. Other people, it was interesting, some other kingdoms would come in, and they would try to set up sort of puppet empires. And so at the end of the day, this kingdom was its own kingdom, yet it had fealty to maybe the main king. Now, we think of this more like in Western empires. We think of this as we think about maybe the feudal empires that you saw in Europe, where you would have a king and then you would have these different lords over different areas. And so there was definitely an autonomy, definitely an existence on their own, but they paid fealty to the king. And then Babylon came in, and they were really fascinating. The Babylonians would come into a kingdom. They would come into the capital cities, and they would then take over the smaller cities. And rather than leaving the people there, they would take the people. And they would take them out of where they are, and they would move them around into the empire in different places. And it was really kind of an interesting reason that they did that. In a couple ways, they wanted to learn from them. They understood that different cultures and different peoples have different experiences and have different things that they're experts on, and they realize that they can learn from that. I mean, I think that's something that we can learn today, that other people who are different than us, we can learn from their experience, and we can learn who they are. So they wanted to learn from people, their science. They wanted to learn their history. They wanted to understand their religion and who they were as a people. There was also a dark side of that, which is that as the people left their communities, they left their homes. They left their temples. They left the places that they considered their home and where their religion was and where their culture was centered, where everything they did, that was who they were at their essence. And so separating these people from Jerusalem was divorcing them from their experience of religion. It was divorcing them from their experience of their culture and their home and their community and their music and their life and all the things that made them the kind of people that they were. And so when they got to Babylon and they began to look around, they realized they were surrounded by people who had different understandings and different cultural identities, worshiped different gods, and thought about things different ways. Another thing about the ancient world that is helpful to us at this time is to also understand that your God was a God of a specific area. If your God failed to protect you in that land or in that region, your God was a failure, or your God abandoned you. Your God was either not strong enough to protect you, and the other gods had defeated your God, or your God said, I'm abandoning you, I'm allowing this to happen to you because you've done something wrong. That is at the essence of how they understood themselves. Again, in a polytheistic world where you have the idea, the understanding that there are multiple gods in existence, this is one of the ways that people would have thought about this. And so as these people get to Babylon, they're asking these hard questions. Well, who is this God that our ancestors have been worshiping? And why would this God abandon us to this situation? Maybe God wasn't strong enough. Is this a God worthy of worship? What do we do about this God? And do we continue to worship this God? Or how do we handle these conversations and questions we're having? So to answer that, they began to collect the stories that they had been telling each other. And these stories were stories that they told each other about their ancestors, about their people, about where they came from and who they were. And these stories helped them to answer the questions of who is God? And does this God care about us? Does this God care that we have any kind of future at all? Is this God going to be with us from generations on from us? Will our kids and our grandkids, will they have this God? So today we find ourselves at the end of that collection. Genesis serves to answer all those questions. It's stories that connect to all of that. But Genesis, it's interesting, isn't the ending of this journey. It actually ends on a cliffhanger. It's going to bring us into the next part of their story that is probably the largest identity of these people and their story. But what comes next and kind of where we are will help us see how they made sense of their experience and of being taken home from this home that they had, being taken from it, and then wondering this really big question is, will we ever return? And that was sort of the end. That was sort of the tension. That was kind of like, that kind of sat underneath all of the questions that they had. This was like the layer behind the layer behind the layer is, well, will we ever go home? And if we go home, will we go home different than the way that we arrived? Will we be the same kind of people? Will we worship God in the same way? Will this God be different for us? What does all of that look like? So this is sort of the tension. This is the stress. This is the dynamic at play inside the Genesis story. So as we close this up, here's what I want us to do. And this is a big point that I want to make because as a teacher and as the spiritual leader of our community, my biggest thing for us is that as we leave this space, we take with us the tools and the ability to look at things in a healthy way. And so as we end this Genesis thing, this is really what I want us to do as a people. This is the direction I think that we should be looking at this book, if I can be bold enough to say this is what I think we should do. Genesis should be seen like a big epic, an absolutely massive epic that helps these people to understand who they were and where they got where they were. It is an epic that is to function as a metaphor for the reality that they found themselves in. If we start there, and then you can ask all the questions you want on the other side of that, if we can start there, this book will make a lot more sense as we try to read it. A grand epic as a metaphor for people making sense of their reality. I want you to imagine, and I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but just hear me out. If you were an elf, and you were trying to make sense of your life, and somebody gave you The Lord of the Rings, let's watch, let's not read. Don't have time. We're just going to watch. A lot of walking, battles, more walking, I get it. Some weird talking, some moons of blood, whatever. But that would help you make sense of your story, wouldn't it? This is how we got where we are. This is the things that happened. And when we watch that movie, we get into it. I mean, come on. When you see the army come over the hill and the sun comes flying up, like like the hair on your arm just goes straight up in the air, and you're just like, oh man, and you can feel it, right? Well, that's what these stories did. Man, people didn't sit around and go, today we're going to read Genesis 4, verse 5. Let's read it together. Wasn't that nice? They didn't do that. They read it like an epic. They had people like Ron, who work in theater, who told the story in such a way that it came alive. And they could feel it, and they could act it out, and they could hear the words. And it meant something to them like that. Wouldn't that change how you read this book? Wouldn't that change everything about it? So, we're going to come to the end. And this end of this, in this epic journey that we're on, we come to the single longest narrative that we find in all of Genesis. It spans 14 chapters. Now, I promise we're not going to read them all. We do not have time for that, I promise you. But what I want to do today is I want to do this. I want to look at an arc of the story through a few of the key moments that are going to reveal profound insights that the exiles who told this story believed about God and how God works. Does that make sense? So we're going to find those big moments that were sort of the key moments that they would sit back, and these were the moments that gave them the aha moments that helped them understand who God is, how God works, and what does this mean for their lives. So I want to start at the beginning of this epic story, 14 chapters. It's the story of a man named Joseph, but we're going to start with his father, Israel. We talked about Israel last week. We talked about his name change that he experienced as he took on a new name. His old name didn't make any sense anymore. He took on a new name of Israel that means one who wrestles with God. What we learned last week is that that name became the identity for the people because that's exactly who they were. It was a way of telling them, you're okay. That here you are in exile and you're asking questions like, is there a God? Does God love me? Does God have a future for my life? And Israel, the name says, yes, you are fine. You are okay. You are one who wrestles with God, just like Israel did. I told us that all of us need permission. And this is the permission that we're given. What does that mean for us? It means that God is okay with us wrestling. It means that God is okay with our hard questions. It means that our faith isn't soft and weak because of questions. Our faith is real and alive because we ask hard questions. And sometimes the response to those questions, and this is a maturity, a spiritual maturity, the most spiritual response that you can ask of a religious question, when you're asking a question like that, the most spiritual response you can have is, ready? I don't know. I don't know. And God doesn't look at you and say, I can't believe you don't know. He says, good, keep wrestling. That's the lesson that we learned from his story. We go on, and we're going to find out more about him today. Israel went on after his name change. He had many, many sons, but the focus of his affection was in particular on his youngest son named Joseph. So let's read his story. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children because he was the son of his old age. And he made him an ornamental robe. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him. I have a cat. You guys know I have a cat? You guys seen Chopper? Chopper. Chopper is my boy. And in my old age, I have 2 daughters, but I also have a son. He is orange, he has whiskers, and we like to cuddle. Chopper recently got a little present. If you saw it, he has a little sweater that makes him look like a candy corn. And on the back of it, in sequins, it says Boo. And I love it. And it is perfect, but here's the problem with Chopper. I have to be very careful about Chopper because when the girls come home from school and they walk in the door, sometimes I'm on the couch and sometimes I am cuddling Chopper and he is purring and I'm like, I have my boy, it's my favorite. That's not a thing you want to say to your kids, especially when it's a cat. And Emily will say, well, he doesn't like me and you don't like me either. He went in Maggie's room, and I heard her screaming as I was trying to get out the door, and she's like, get him out, I don't want him in here. Now, truth be told, they actually love him. But could you imagine if I told them, girls, I've decided I am no longer going to buy you presents. I am no longer going to buy you clothes because I need to save that money for Chopper. Because I am a sweater cat dad, and he needs sweaters, and frankly, you can just wear leftovers, right? What would they say? Do you think they would love Chopper as much as they love him? No, absolutely not. Well, this is the problem here. Israel has sort of an inappropriate and kind of a damaging relationship with his sons that he has chosen a favorite. It's okay, you can have a favorite, just don't tell anybody. He has a favorite, and it says that they knew that his father loved him more than all his brothers. He got him a special robe. He wasn't being equitable and fair. So they hated Joseph because of it. Now, these dynamics were a mess, guys. And it gets worse, though. Joseph was also known for his dreams. And as he's having these dreams, he decides to start telling people about his dreams. And he even goes so far to go to his brothers. He couldn't take a hint that his brothers hated him. And he told them one of his dreams that he has. And I don't know if they're sitting at dinner or maybe they were hanging out, they're playing video games together, whatever it was. Joseph looks over and he goes, hey guys, I had a dream. And the brothers look over and they go, what was the dream? And he goes, well, you guys were bowing down before me. Isn't that great? And they hated him even more. And they said, what is wrong with you? I can't understand. And then their jealousy just broke. These guys had just had enough with him, and their jealousy had reached an absolute breaking point. Now, unfortunately, at this breaking point, their father was not around to offer his protection to Joseph, and here's what took place. His brothers went to a pasture, their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I'll send you to them. He answered, here I am, I'll go. So he said to him, go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and then bring word back to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. He came to Shechem. A man found him wandering the field, so he was looking for his brothers, wondering, where are they? Where could they possibly be? And he said, well, what are you seeking? And he said, I'm seeking my brothers. Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock? And the man said, well, they've gone away. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So they were trying to find a better place to pasture the flock. So Joseph went after his brothers. He found them at Dothan. Well, here's where it gets really wild. They saw him at a distance. And before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. So these brothers are sitting around. They must have been sitting up on a hill. They see their brother sort of coming that way. They could recognize who he was. Who knows who made the first pass at this idea? You know, sometimes this is the way things go. Somebody says, well, maybe we should do something about him. And somebody gets a little bolder. Somebody says, we should just knock him out. Somebody says, why don't we just kill him? Let's just get rid of him. And they all fall into this temptation that maybe this murder is the answer to get rid of him. So they said to one another, here comes this dreamer. Come now, let's kill him. Let's throw him into the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him. So they'll have deniability. And then we'll see what becomes of those dreams about us bowing down before him. But when Reuben heard it, who was one of the brothers, he delivered him out of their hands. And he said, let's not kill him. Let's not take his life. He stands up against the brothers. Shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hands on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornamental robe that he wore, And they took him and they threw him into a pit. Then Judah said to his brothers, well, wait a minute, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? What have we really gained in all of this? Shouldn't we get something out of this? So he said, come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. And let's not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, he is our own flesh. Let's just sell him into slavery. And the brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up and lifting him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. So now, Joseph ends up in Egypt. The author goes on, it says that once in Egypt, Joseph was then sold to somebody else, an Egyptian official named Potiphar. And as we go on in the story, we read this about Potiphar and about his experience with Joseph. It says, Joseph found favor in Potiphar's eyes, and he became his attendant, and Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything that he owned. So again, we see Joseph, and this is kind of his journey that he experiences. He goes from this young 17-year-old, he gains favor in his father's eyes. Everything looks like it's going well for him. He gets thrown into the pit, disaster strikes, and then he comes out of the pit, he goes to Egypt, he's in slavery, it looks like his life is over, it's all down. He gets rescued from it by Potiphar's grace and his compassion towards him, his way of seeing that maybe Joseph has some value. And then he says, you know what, you're so good, you're so everything about you, I'm going to go ahead and put you in charge of everything that I own. So the author goes on, and he even says that everything that Joseph touched was blessed. He takes it even a step further, and he expands on it and pushes it even forward and says that even everything that Potiphar owned because of Joseph was blessed. His fields and his house and his wealth. Joseph just being around was a blessing. But just like before, Joseph's place of being favored has to come to an end because that is the story. It says, so Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care with Joseph in charge. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. His master's wife took notice of this tall drink of water and said, come to bed with me. But he refused. He said, with me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. All Potiphar does is worry about the food that he's eating. I could do whatever I want, but he says, but I won't. He says, no one is greater in this house than I am, but my master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. So the picture is that every time Joseph walked by, she assaulted him with her words. She went after him at every chance she could get, and he is fleeing at every opportunity. He finds himself alone, and he just runs from it. He won't even be near her because he knows what her intents are. Now, the story goes on. It says, presumably out of the resentment for refusing her advances, Potiphar's wife goes on and lies to her husband and says, well, Joseph tried to assault me. Joseph tried to take advantage of me. And so she's upset and she's angry about what's going on, and so she turns him in for something he didn't do, that she was in fact the guilty one. Well, despite his innocence, Joseph was thrown into prison, and there he spent some years waiting and wondering if he'd ever get out. Do you see the way that this author is telling us the story, right? Again, you've got this young man, he's blessed, his father sees favor in him, and then he gets into the pit of despair that he's in. He comes out of that. He goes into slavery in Egypt. He's now in the pit again of slavery. He gets raised up by Potiphar, who sees favor in him. This situation happens that takes place that puts him right back in the prison cell that he was in. So it's like every good thing is followed up by just something awful. Well, while he's in prison, he begins to dream again, and he begins to interpret other people's dreams. And he's so good at it that other people are like, well, you should interpret my dream and tell me about my dreams. And you tell this guy about his dreams. And everybody starts to do this. It's kind of like Shawshank. He does one guy's taxes, then he starts doing everybody's taxes. And then he starts doing the warden's taxes, right? You've seen Shawshank, right? We have people who haven't seen Shawshank. I'm going to ruin it for you. You've had long enough. You guys have had long enough to see Shawshank. So he gets all this favor because he's doing this. So he starts interpreting dreams like that. And eventually it gets to Pharaoh. Pharaoh has a dream that nobody understands. And they say, well, you know who's really good at dreams? Joseph. Go find Joseph and he'll interpret the dream. So Joseph interprets the dream and he tells Pharaoh, well, your dream is about a famine. And a famine is about to come to Egypt. So the Pharaoh does this incredible thing and he says, okay, well, dream interpreter, you got the dream right. I'm going to give you the dream job. You are now going to help prepare us for the famine. You're going to work in my court and you're going to get us ready so that we are prepared when all of these other kingdoms fail, that we will have all the food that we need. Joseph goes further and he doesn't get just enough food to feed the Pharaoh. He does an incredible thing and says we should be a generous people because we have more to give. So let's make sure that everybody else is okay as well. Wow, I didn't realize the lesson we could learn in that as well, can we? We are blessed to bless other people, that it's right there in front of us. Well, this is where it gets really interesting. The famine arrives. It doesn't just affect Egypt, it affects all of the known world of the ancient Near East. It gets all the way to Canaan. And in Canaan, Joseph's family begins to starve because they don't have enough food. His brothers, desperate for food, get sent to Egypt to buy grain because it's become understood in the ancient world that, hey, there is food in Egypt. Buy the food from Egypt. And this is where the story gets really interesting. Now, Joseph was governor over the land. It was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him, so the dream comes true. They bowed with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. But he treated them like strangers. He spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he said. They said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." And although Joseph had recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Now, I don't think they're stupid. I don't think this is supposed to make us think that his brothers weren't intelligent enough to know who he was. I know that some of us are bad at remembering faces, but I don't think that you would forget your brother. I think what's going on here is he's been in this Egyptian court. And I think that he is beginning to dress and have the makeup and the outfits and the hats and different pieces that sort of make up someone who would be in the court. I don't know. We don't know all the details of that particular time, but in a way, he's hidden from his brothers where they can't be hidden from him. And so he does this interesting thing. He responds to them in a harsh way and is sort of like, well, who do you think you guys are coming into my court? What are you doing here? They say, well, we need to buy food. Well, then it goes on, and this kind of charade continues over and over again of his brothers coming, of him sort of recognizing them, putting them in kind of a weird place. And then we get to chapter 45. And as the charade comes to an end, Joseph reveals himself to them. And then it goes on this. It says, "Then Joseph said to his brothers, 'Come closer to me.' And they came closer. He said, 'I'm your brother.'" I just want to imagine the moment. I have to think that there's some drama to this and that there's a pause. "I am your brother." And then he adds to the pregnant pause, "Joseph." And then as they're sitting there thinking, oh gosh, what did we do? He reminds them, "Whom you sold into Egypt." All of a sudden they realize the power dynamics have shifted tremendously. They have nothing. They're starving. Joseph is on the Egyptian court, no doubt surrounded by members of the royal court that serve in the military, that serve as protection for him. and they're absolutely terrified. And so as we go on, he continues and he says, and now. And you wonder, I wonder what he was going to say next. And now. And they think he's going to say, and now you will die. And now your story comes to a conclusion. And now, boys, it's over. He says, and now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. He tells them it's okay. He gives them a sense of peace, a place to breathe and relax. Then he goes on, he says, for God sent me here before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be no plowing and there will be no harvest. But God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So, it wasn't you who sent me here, but God. Now, interestingly enough, what I think he's doing here is I think Joseph is showing us that he's able to get kind of 30,000 feet above his circumstances. I don't think he's making a definitive theological statement here about the future and God knowing exactly what's going to go on and setting the chess pieces in place. I don't think God wanted his brothers to punish his son unjustly like this. I don't think he wanted him sold into slavery. I don't think God wanted the sin and the pain of the injustice that took place. I think what Joseph is saying is, when I get 30,000 feet above this, I can see the way that God is working in these incredibly difficult circumstances to bring life out of it, which is something we see later on in Scripture. That's the point that we should see here. He sees that his God is the kind of God who meets people in their circumstances, whatever those circumstances are, and redeems those circumstances into something good. And all of us need to be reminded of that. We're all going through stuff that is difficult, that is hard, that we wish wasn't happening, and we don't have to blame God for it. What we can do is we can have hope in God that God will work through it for us, for not just our good, but for the good. That there will be something that will come out of that experience where there will be life and grace and mercy and goodness. I don't know how God does it, but he does. He just does. Joseph's brothers made a terrible choice, and the choice had real consequences. Joseph suffered real harm. But the point is, God took a reality of that brokenness, and he worked within it to create a future, and it saved an entire nation and nations from starving. So God intended it for good. So as we go on, though, you could sort of end it here. You could say that this is the end of the story, that God met the harm, that God transformed it into something redemptive. We would see that maybe, that's not, that kind of continues on in Scripture. We could say, well, that's the point. That's what we're going to learn here. And that's a great place to stop, because this is where the author ends this story. From here, he's going to pick it up in the book of Exodus. And in that story, we learn that Joseph's dreams, that all of this that sort of ends like, oh man, this story ended so good. It gets kind of like one of those Marvel movies that, it ends and you go, wow, this is so great. I'm so glad the way this ended. And we've all learned to stay in movie theaters long enough because there's something coming after the trailer, isn't there? Or after the credits. There's always an end credit scene. Well, the beginning of Exodus is the end credit scene to the movie that sort of says, oh, you thought everything was good. It's all about to go downhill again. Now, Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died. Then a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites, as they came to be known, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. Now again, I want you to think about the exiled people who told this story. That sometimes they ended with Joseph's story and they ended it on the happy thing and they said, all right, let's eat and let's celebrate, that's good. Maybe somebody gets up a few minutes later and says, let's hear the end of the story, let's talk about where the rest of it went, and they give the end credit scene that says, but then all the people ended up in slavery. For the exiled people, for the exiled Hebrew people, this shift in the story, they needed this because it resonated with them. It resonated with their experience. In many ways, they could see through their ancestors' shift into slavery, oppression, and longing for rescue exactly how they felt. Everything was going fine. Jerusalem was this wonderful city. We had this kingdom. We had our religion. We had our money. We had our culture. We had everything. And then it all fell apart. They felt abandoned by God. They felt captive in a strange land. And they wondered if there was any hope at all. And they looked at Joseph and they said, how did it happen? Look at his life just kept going like this. And they said, this is exactly what we're seeing in this epic. That in this metaphor that we see in this epic, this is our journey. That there are highs and lows and highs and lows, just like we have in our lives. Highs and lows and highs and lows and highs and lows. They get to the end and they're in a low spot. They're in a deep, deep spot in exile in Babylon. And they look and they say, what are we going to do? What's going to happen? Somebody goes, but wait. Let's go back to Joseph's story. And they said, I see that the Israelite people ended up in slavery. I wonder if God will do for them what he did for Joseph all those times. I mean, aren't the Israelites, aren't our people, our ancestors in the story, aren't they the descendants of this guy who experienced these ups and downs of being down in a valley and lifted into favor and down in a valley and lifted into favor? Maybe there is hope that they aren't abandoned by God. Maybe in these stories that we read, maybe we can see that there is hope, and that's exactly what it was. These stories gave them hope. Through the stories, they saw that God would never abandon them. Through these stories, they saw that God just kept showing up. Through these stories, they had belief that would be eventually put into these words. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you, and he will never forsake you. And this is where I want to connect this for us today. There is a paradox in this thing that we call the Christian faith. And that paradox is the very things that we believe are the things of heaven are the very same things that make us homesick for somewhere that we've never been. So these people are sitting in slavery in this story, or they're sitting in Babylon in their story. They're reading about these slaves and they're thinking that these people are saying, when will we be rescued? When will we ever be able to go home? When we are homesick for Jerusalem, for the place we've never been. Because our ancestors have told us the stories they've shared about who God was in those moments. We long to be there. And the Babylonians or the exiles in Babylon are doing the same thing. They're saying, we long for this place because we want to go back home. We want to belong there. We know that there's something that isn't right about this place we find ourselves in, and we want to get there. And the very same thing is true of us. That's why these stories have power when we read them, because we all feel homesick. We have all seen love and grace and mercy and compassion and goodness. Yet we live in a world of greed and hurt and ugliness and racism, and we are homesick for a place that we've never been where those things don't exist. A lot of people say the answer then is to just sit around and wait for Jesus to return. Some people did that last week, by the way. Other people say we should just sit around and wait to go to him and be miserable and, well, it'll all be over someday. But here's what I think, and this is what I want to close with. What if Jesus is a lot closer than we think? What if perhaps, like the exiles, we don't have to go anywhere to experience God? What if these stories that they read and told were teaching them that God is everywhere? What if it was them realizing that as Joseph left his land and he ended up in Egypt, they read the story and they said, but God was with him there. And they looked at that story and they said, well, God isn't just over here in this place, that God is with these slaves in Egypt and he's going to be with them as they go back to the promised land, that God is with them where they are. That maybe God isn't captured by this ancient idea of borders and boundaries and specific places. Maybe God expands beyond all the walls that we think God could possibly fit in, whether that is borders and countries or whether that is ideologies, that God expands beyond all of that stuff. That is the truth that they learned in this, and that's what they're teaching us. God isn't just in heaven because we're busy dragging the things of heaven to this earth. God's presence isn't something we wait for. It is something we wake up to, something we can experience because Jesus and this promise he gave. Come to me. Come to me. Come home to me. All you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. This afternoon, as I go home, I am going to get on my couch and I am going to sleep. And I am going to experience the rest of my home. There's nothing like going home, is there? And resting. Jesus doesn't promise life will be easy. He doesn't say that your life is going to be struggleless. He doesn't say that your life is going to be without questions. And these stories that we've been reading show us that. But he does promise that we can come to him and that we will find rest. So friends, however far that you feel you are from God, if you feel like Joseph, taken into slavery in Egypt far away, if you feel like those people, his descendants who are there, and you say, man, I just feel like I am so far from God, or if you're over here and you're like these exiles and you feel you're so far from God and you say, man, this world is so far from God. It needs more grace and it needs more peace. And man, it just needs more love. And you're just desperate for it. Jesus says, come to me and rest. He says, I'll teach you how to love. I'll teach you how to have grace. I'll teach you how to have compassion. I'll teach you how to have mercy. And you will then go into this world. And he says, it will have heaven through you. So come this morning and find rest. Let's pray, and then we're going to take communion, and then we'll close. God, thank you for this passage. Thank you for this journey, this absolute epic journey that helps us in these stories to see these very real questions and the tension in them and the call that you have on our lives to be people of grace and compassion and love and mercy. Help us to never find this place where we're not homesick for the things of heaven. Help us to be homesick for the reality of heaven, but help us to not get cynical in it. Help us in that place to not get so saddened by the reality of our world that we don't have hope. Help us in that place to be people of joy and peace and love and mercy, and have us have that happen because of the way that we come to Jesus. The one who teaches us the love of grace, the way of compassion, and the way to life. As we come to this table, we see the compassion and mercy, the grace of Jesus. We see his love on full display, his arms spread wide, welcoming us to come into the arms, not of the Jesus who died on the cross, but the Jesus who was given new life and extends that to each and every one of us here. It's in your name we pray. Amen.